Welcome to the Shield Your Business from Chaos podcast, where there's no building, no people, no third-party suppliers, and no systems all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield.
Hi, welcome to KISSBCP podcast. Today, Skip Williams and I, Roswitha first, are going to talk about some business continuity hot topics, as it were. We've kind of been brainstorming, and we thought we'd share a little bit about some of our thoughts on business continuity, and we hope you enjoy.
First off, Roswitha, how are you?
I'm doing well today. How are you, Skip?
I'm doing very well as well. Summer's almost coming to an end. School kids are going back to school, everything like that, and it's going to be winter before we know it.
Yes.
So you said some hot topics to talk about. What sort of topics do you have on the agenda, or is this a bit of a free for all? We can talk about whatever we want. What's tickling you today?
I think a little bit of both. So there's a couple things that I want us to talk about in our upcoming podcast. So some of the ideas that I think you and I would enjoy talking about are, are how to talk with IT when you're doing your business continuity planning and dealing with the challenges of your recovery time objective, or RTO, and your recovery point objective, RPO. So that's one thing I think we should put on the calendar for a future podcast. I was also really interested in kind of talking about industry trade shows, with the last couple of years being virtual and then a combination of virtual and in person. What can you get out of an industry trade show, and sort of who's really the best audience to attend the bigger industry trade shows? So I think that's something that we could enjoy discussing. The one kind of on my mind for today has to do with the concept of business resilience. So we've got our new nomenclature for the industry, moving away from business continuity planning to business resilience. And what exactly is it? What should it be? What do we want it to be? And I think that's a good conversation for us to have today. I think we can have some interesting and perhaps even somewhat heated discussion.
I was going to say, well, heated, I don't know about that. We both seem to be pretty good at keeping a level playing, or level temperament, I guess.
Let's just amp up the energy today.
But those topics you've all picked are there's strong feelings on both sides. I don't think you're going to get very many that are going to run down the middle of the fence kind of thing. You're going to always have, somebody taking a side on it. And I think that probably doing it at some of those at a later date is probably a good thing, because as we were talking about just at the start of the podcast, or just before the podcast, I guess it depends on your mood that you're in and how much you want to share the honest truth.
Okay.
Sure, let's go the nomenclature route, because having been in this field and been around this field since '83, I've seen, in essence, not all of them, because that's a long laundry list of terms. But let's see what we can just come out of with those ones, I guess.
Okay, so I started business continuity in 2000, just after Y2K projects closed out for the most part. And at the time, the terminology that we were using was disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning. And that was kind of it. And even explaining that back then sometimes got confusing, especially if you were talking to IT about their business continuity plan as opposed to their disaster recovery plan. Very different things. But what I really want to talk about is the concept of business resilience, and kind of what meaningful change that could mean for an organization.
Okay.
and not really go into, so for our audience, I'm not really looking to go kind of into the very specific definitions of all the alphabet soup that the industry has. This is really specific to, in the last couple of years, the idea of business resilience has kind of cropped up more and more, and the industry seems to be trending towards replacing the term business resilience, well, replacing business continuity planning with business resilience. But what does that actually mean? And are some people defining that scope too narrowly and not looking at what's the possible outcome of that concept taken to its kind of logical extension? So first, from you, perhaps some thoughts on this new idea, this new terminology. And you don't have to be nice.
Well, I do, because YouTube will blackmail us, and Spotify will throw us in the corner, and we'll never get a podcast out ever again. So you can't be too mean.
Well,
The really unfortunate part with it is that constantly changing the name, or constantly changing the nomenclature, constantly changing the title of whatever all of this is, just causes confusion, both within the business, like the business that's trying to create their business continuity plan or their business resiliency plan. See, there's not even, that doesn't even roll off the tongue smoothly. But anyways, and general people, because as you said, you started this, working in BCP, or is it BRP? I don't know. You started working in this whole industry in around 2000 doing Y2K plans. And that's really where I got my feet wet in it. And when I say that I've been around it since 83 is because my dad was doing it before Y2K. And so I was exposed to it. I wasn't doing it at 10 in 1983. And so I was forever around the term disaster recovery. And then, so like you said, where it was all this confusion about the migration from disaster recovery to business continuity. And then it's now the confusion to go to business continuity, because it then was a business continuity plan, then business continuity planning, then it was business continuity management, then it was then it was BCM.
business continuity program.
Business continuity program. And then now they've thrown in business resiliency. So it's like, holy smokes, what is this? So if you work, and we'll go back to the customer, if you go back to, you think of it from the customer, if you've been telling somebody in finance who has no care about what sort of recovery or resiliency their business has, they just care that they get payroll or AP or AR done, or their general ledger, whatever stuff is done. You come in and bug them once a year to do an exercise, and you tell them you're here to do the business continuity plan, they're like, okay. And then because they've heard that for the past 5 to 10 years. And then next year you call it the business resiliency plan. They're like, well, what happened to the business continuity plan? Oh, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. But why did the name change? Well, we thought this was more representative of it. And you're like, whatever, it's been finance forever. Like finance is finance is finance. Like, I mean, there are some variations in it, but not that much. And it's just like, just stick with the terminology. If it doesn't make sense, change the definition of what it is. Don't change the name of it. Because as I'm sure all of our listeners can tell, I'm Canadian, and I'll do all the out and about roof and boots, and see, you can see Roswitha twitch as I'm saying all of those.
No, I'm laughing.
Because
not twitching, promise.
Because she's, well, I'll call you a Texan now, but originally Pennsylvanian. Whenever I get my work visas to cross the border, I have to go to the US border, do the whole thing and whatever and stuff for this. And they say, well, what field do you work in? And I say, well, business continuity planning. And they're like, well, what's that? And so you have to explain it. And they look at me, and I've had this on multiple occasions. So it's not just one person. They've looked at it on multiple occasions, and they're like, that's not really what you do. Seriously, what is the industry that you work in? And I'm like, no, man, that is seriously the industry I work in. And all of a sudden, the last time was probably 6 or 7 years ago. And so then now I have to go back to the same border to talk to possibly the same person and tell them I'm doing business resiliency as opposed to business continuity. And it's like, just keep the name the same, change the definition. I don't care, but just keep the name the same. So that's my soapbox. I'll get off it. I'll stop tirading and everything like that on it and everything. Yeah. So that's why I said there could be some interesting discussion today, and I'm not to say biting my tongue to not swear here, there, or wherever on it, but it's just one of those things where it's like, oh my goodness, can we please stop changing the title of what we do? Use King Phoenix and Shield with its mapping, its dashboards, its permissioning, its dependency mapping, and its automatically redacted plans to shield your business from chaos. KingsBridgeBCP.com.
So from an outsider perspective, and by outsider, I mean your average employee that once a year participates in some business continuity planning activities. So for them, changing the name really doesn't make any sense because yeah, it's confusing, right? They've already had to kind of adapt to, various acronyms like BIA and TRA and RTOs and RPOs. I mean, just that right there for somebody who only looks at this stuff once a year. And I'm not saying that they should only be looking at it once a year, but in many places, that's really all that happens is, once a year update to the plan, and then maybe that same person might be participating in some exercises. But the terminology is not what they use every day. So I agree from that standpoint that changing the acronym, changing the words, the terminology is confusing and not necessarily productive. Now, from an industry insider, from a business continuity planner or a business continuity manager, the change can make a little bit more sense. Business continuity has always suffered from a lack of attention. Now, there are some companies that do business continuity really, really well and really put the not just kind of as a mouthpiece, but honestly put the time and money and energy into truly developing a robust plan or program. But the thing is that, for a lot of companies, that's not the case. And one of the issues that in my career, almost every business continuity program I either led or was a team member of, the conversation always happened like, how do we get more attention on this? How do we get people to be more serious about this? And not just the business unit team members, but even the C-suite. There's a reason why business continuity so often historically has fallen under IT, because IT was the one department that recognized that there was a need for it and was willing to take it on.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting is that I forget who it was. It was just recently, like in the past couple of weeks, we were asked, what department do we normally work with when we start working with a company? And we've been everywhere. We've been obviously IT. We've been IT. We've been finance, because finance is aware of the dollars and cents, everything like that. Now it seems to be that we're under maybe like a risk fraud sort of thing. Probably the weirdest ones we've been in is that we were under facilities with one customer, and we're like, facilities? How did this happen?
HR was one for me.
HR, yeah, that's another one.
A little bit makes sense, but yeah, I mean, risk fraud is really kind of risk management is kind of the logical link.
Well, and that's the thing with the business resiliency, and as we were talking about it before we started recording, was that business resiliency is a lot like risk. Just hear me out. Is that it's a lot like risk management from the standpoint that it's, mitigating how you can be like, it's more end to end than just recovery. And it's like, okay, well, that's fantastic. And the hard part is that when we've been working with some companies where they've put us with their risk fraud department, risk fraud treats us like risk people, but we don't know anything about risk management, risk mitigation. Like, that's not what BRP, BCP, BCM, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't fit, because it's like two different things. And I mean, one of the topics that you wanted to talk about, or that you said, down the road or whatever, is your TRA and BIA. Well, you would think that you'd be able to go to your risk department and pretty much say, so where's your report on your, in essence, your BIA that you guys work on a daily basis or annual basis or monthly basis or quarterly basis? And very rarely do we ever see that they can just hand over a report that's, you know, consumable. Normally it's like a 200 or 300 page report. And you're like, oh my goodness, can I get the executive summary on this? I want short answers. And it's just unfortunate that BCP doesn't seem to sit still long enough to settle on a name and then to not worry, or to then sort of figure out what the definition is afterwards. And
Or
the
the
way
scope,
yeah, and they seem to like not ambulance chase, because that's such a terrible analogy that I've heard so many people say. They're like, because the guy at the border, I explained what I do, and he said, "Oh, so you're an ambulance chaser." No, we try to do things before the ambulance, but anyways, that's here nor there. But the thing with it is that it's kind of like, I always equate it to like project management, like the field of project management.
Mhm.
It's been project management forever. The scope of
Mhm.
what project management is and what the definition is of it and everything, it's changed over the years, because I mean, project
Mhm.
management as a field is, for all intents and purposes, 100-ish years old.
Mhm.
For those who check and want to get mad at me, by all means, email away or comment and whatever, however you want to get a hold of us, to let me know how long project management has been around for. But it's always, the term has always been project management.
That's
It
true.
doesn't,
That's
it
true.
doesn't change. It doesn't
So,
vary.
okay, so here's my take on this.
Okay.
Is that I think that business resilience as a term is the intended growth and maturity of business continuity planning for the future.
Okay.
As RTOs get shorter, as requirements get bigger, as the cost of single incidents has skyrocketed,
Yep.
the idea of business resilience, instead of for sort of encompassing just like the BCP portion that we've traditionally kind of handled, is that the idea of business resilience not only broadens what business continuity practitioners focus on, kind of going all the way to the beginning, which is essentially risk, and then all the way through kind of achieving normal operations. The idea for me is that, you know, in kind of a crass way, you could say, like, we're making ourselves more important, but really the point of it is to make what we call business continuity a bigger focus within the organization, so that the right resources, the right amount of attention, the money that's truly needed is all coming to that. And so business resilience, if you were to take it from essentially risk all the way to normal operations, the idea is that we're more visible that way. We can do more good that way. You know, so many companies have one person doing BCP, or even BCP is only a part of their job if it's a small company, right?
Mhm.
Whereas the reality is, especially for bigger companies, you need a whole team of people to do it right.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem is that you don't have enough resources put into business continuity. So it's chronically understaffed, which means you're not doing as good of a job as you could be doing to protect the company. The other thing is that because of the high cost of single catastrophic incidents, we really want to do more to mitigate those and to be better at recovering and, you know, word of the pandemic, pivoting. So if we look at business resilience as kind of the whole bigger scope, then not only do we want to kind of reduce the depth of the impact of a single catastrophic incident, but you in general want to kind of like reduce the dips from normal operations. And by that, I mean, you know, being able to respond faster or more appropriately to somewhat minor incidents, things that you would classify as like an incident and not as a disaster or catastrophic
Yeah.
event. So if the organization matures and is able to do that, then your overall financial impact to the company is going to be less. And your SLAs hypothetically are going to shorten, and everything to like ticket resolution is less of a panic, stress, deviation from normal operations. So it empowers the organization, hopefully, to deal with all of this in a sort of more mature fashion than, oh, we're responding to this single incident and it might last a day and it might last 60 days or 6 months, but we're focusing on the resilience all the way to kind of like the day-to-day portion.
So I guess the question I have on that one, this is, I have a funny feeling that this is going to end with us agreeing to disagree, but I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that too.
Is that so? If business continuity is supposed to be running from regular operations through the dip back to if business resiliency is supposed to be running between regular operations through the dip and then back to regular operations again, which is fine. We have a very big issue then with all of our incident responders.
How do you mean?
Because incident response as the field then becomes part of business resiliency. Well, as a business continuity practitioner with a few years experience, we don't write incident response. We don't write evacuation plans. We don't do any of the during incident tasks because that's outside of the scope of what we do. We've always said, always, you're in the building, working at regular pace. Fire alarm goes off. You go, oh, you grab whatever things you got to grab. You go down the stairs, whatever stuff this, follow the evacuation procedures, whatever stuff this, and stand out in the parking lot. That is all incident response because that's responding to the incident. And then once everybody is standing out in the parking lot and they're all accounted for and counted and everything, this, whatever, you turn around, you look back in the building, you see like 40 or 50-foot flames coming into the roof. You're clearly not going back today. From that moment there until you're back to regular operations, that's business continuity. That's how we've always defined it to customers. And so the problem is that if we're going from normal to normal, well, that first half, although it's a very short period of time, that first half is now under business resiliency. I'm not sure that incident responder, like the actual guys that do the incident response, not first responders, but like incident responders. They're not really going to be super stoked that all of a sudden their field just got absorbed by this smaller field called business resiliency because somebody had a bright idea to change the name without really checking what they're doing. And they're just coloring outside of the lines with a big fat Sharpie because they feel like it.
So here's the thing is that, you know, all of the organization, including these specific subsets of people that do certain things related to an incident, really truly benefit from the increased visibility and the increased funds. Number one. Number two, business continuity planning happens before the incident and happens at that specific point of the incident getting back to normal. So I would argue, and this is not taking away the value of incident response at all, but for example, communications has its own role during an event, and hypothetically they're talking to the business continuity people, if not actually the business continuity person kind of helping kind of guide certain things and then letting like the PR department and everybody else kind of in internal communications do their thing. But it's not normally done in a silo, or at least it shouldn't be. It needs to be in conjunction with business continuity. I've worked at places where, yes, there were specific people that did incident response or communications, but it was all wrapped up in the plan. So that's maybe more than your typical business continuity plan, but it would make a whole ton of sense if you're using the term business resilience to kind of explain the end-to-end functions. Again, starting with risk management. So I would say that the field of business continuity isn't smaller than incident response. I think they're pretty much on like equal footing, I would think. Not to diminish anybody's value, because none of this can happen without everybody doing their part, including communications, right? But I would still say that we all benefit from the elevation to business resilience as a broader concept.
I agree with that wholeheartedly because
you agree with me?
hang on a second, because you like to argue. I agree with that wholeheartedly from the standpoint that in a perfect world of use King Phoenix and Shield with its mapping, its dashboards, its permissioning, its dependency mapping, and its automatically redacted plans to shield your business from chaos. KingsBridgeBCP.com. No taxes, no war, no famine, no oppression, no, heat waves, all sort of stuff of this, whatever, in this perfect, world, that would actually be the situation. The unfortunate part is that, so if you're saying that, using your analogy, if incident response and business continuity are the same size, what they should have done is got together and said, hey, let's work with risk and let's work with these guys to sort of like figure out something that covers off the whole shoot match that we do, as opposed to just kind of throwing a term out there, not really explaining what it means and not giving anybody any idea of why they're changing the name. And the reason why I say that hasn't been done, and if it has, that's fantastic, but their communications department should have done a much better job at communicating out to people why this is happening. Because as a BCP person for the past 24 years, I don't have any knowledge of any of this. I don't have to be read in on absolutely everything. But if you want me to use the proper terminology and you want me to do the work the way that's agreed upon, I got to be in the know. Because if we're not in the know, and it's not like this is a massive field. There's a half a dozen to a dozen companies that you could contact almost using like the DRJ's contact list, or the DRIs or BCIs or whatever contact list, and say, hey guys, we're changing the name of the field. We want to change it to this terminology for this reason. We're partnering with all of these different guys, because it's like, okay, well, that's amazing. That's great. Let's do it and be consistent about it. So,
okay. And you don't think that's happened?
No, not at all.
Okay. I can't say that it has or hasn't. I just know that as much as business resilience comes up as a topic, for example, LinkedIn and Twitter as two sources of information, it's obviously being talked about a lot. And it's definitely where the industry is headed. So are you saying that you think that the primary organizations that are either knowledge bases or accrediting entities, or both, should have done a better job of kind of publicizing what all this means?
Yes.
So I'm curious now, and now that means we have to go back and like figure this out, is that when did this term originate and by whom? And I'll have to do some digging, because since we kind of spontaneously picked today's topic, I hadn't actually done that kind of specific research like I normally would.
I think I started seeing the last 2.5 years are a bit of a blur, because there's not really any barometers on what's for what.
Yeah.
But I would say that I probably started seeing business resiliency maybe as a term, maybe 4 to 5 years ago.
That seems about what I remember.
And I would say probably, so let's just say it was 5, just for argument's sake, or throwing a dart at the clock or whatever way you want to look at it. If that's when it was, I would say probably 7 years to 15 years ago, you would see business continuity management, BCM. You would see BCM all the time. And then all of a sudden overnight, it's like somebody just decided that's not sticking, it's not working. So let's try a different spaghetti to throw at the wall. And they came up with business resiliency.
I don't know.
And the reason why I say that, and I know you're like, and you're boosting it, I can see it coming out of you. When did the change disaster recovery turn over to business continuity? Because I would argue it still hasn't, because and I know as insiders as to what the actual difference is. But we're working with a customer right now. This is our first engagement with them. We were working with them last week or whatever, and all of the invites had initially been written out as, this is our building our disaster recovery plan.
Yeah.
And I went back, and it was their IT department. So in fairness, that's the terminology that they're used
That
to.
they
and
use, yeah.
this, whatever. But I went back to them and said, yeah, guys, we can't really do this because here are the differences, and these are why they're different. And the reason why I'm suggesting that we do this now, as opposed to 5 years down the road from now, is so that your people are getting the consistent terminology and they know what's happening, they know what's going on. So it doesn't go from disaster recovery to business continuity on them in 6 months once they, because we don't ever refer to disaster recovery because we don't write disaster recovery plans for anybody.
Right.
And so it's like, so disaster recovery has been around since 83. I would say that business continuity started, well, 83, 80s. I would say that business continuity started coming in maybe around the, like the late 90s, 2000s, in that kind of window, maybe. And disaster recovery is still being used. 40 years
Yeah.
later, it's still being
That
used.
is a good point. That is a
And you're
good
never
point.
going to get rid of it until you actually like just squash it out and just be like, no, this is how it, this is the terminology. And it's like our governing bodies,
Yeah.
use the term loosely, just aren't being that adamant about publicizing this. And
Okay.
they should be.
I can't remember now why I was like, oh, I can't even remember that.
Perfect. I talked long enough so you forgot.
I forgot. But I do have something to say about what you just said.
Uh-oh.
I know. So here's the thing about working as an industry professional, newbie or expert. When you are working with an organization, either as an employee, contractor, consultant, whatever, you go in, and oftentimes you're going to hear terminology that's not what truly industry standard. Like, for example, disaster recovery plan, when really what the organization means is a business continuity plan in many cases. So what do? Do you leave the terminology? This is a rhetorical question. I'm not asking you to answer it yet. What do you do? What do you do? Do you let them use their terminology because it's what they know, or do you correct it? And I think that situation really depends, because like the difference between disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning, those are very well defined within the industry. And I think that would be an important distinction to make with an organization who maybe they have had a DRP since like the 80s or whatever, and they just have always used that terminology. I think it is important to educate the organization on the difference in terminology and explaining that this is what you've always called it, but this is what it means, and this is what we're doing, and this is what this means, and from now on we're going to use these terms correctly. I think that is important. Do I think that it is important to change all the terminology that an organization uses? I don't actually. I think that within reason, leave the terminology that they know, because it's already hard enough to get people on board and supporting their work on business continuity or business resilience. So for example, when somebody only has 10% of their job is business continuity, or what's really true is that it's 10% business continuity on top of the 100% they're already doing, because that's really what it comes down to for many organizations. Is that, yeah, at that point, you don't want to fight any more battles than what you really need to. So stick with BCP. But I do see a lot of value in shifting. I don't want to say changing, but shifting to business resilience, because I really do think that everybody from risk onward to include incident response can benefit from an elevated visibility.
Yes, and I do agree with that. However, see, I didn't say but. However, is that what they should be doing is that as they collect all the dues for all the certification classes that they run and everything is whatever, and the money that they make, and I know they're probably love to say that they're nonprofit, but we all know that's just for tax purposes, is that what they should be doing is spending air brackets / wasting a lot of money on marketing to clearly define what the terminology differences are, so that those who ask for a DR actually know what they're getting, and ask for a BC and they clearly know what they're getting. We've spent a lot of time, effort, and money clarifying those terminologies in our marketing. A little less so now because it's becoming kind of obvious. But even when we're talking to a new prospect and they call us up and they say, hey, I want to, I'm calling, I'm Bill, I'm calling from the finance department and I need a disaster recovery plan for my business. Whoa. Hey, Bill, you're in finance. You're asking for a disaster recovery plan? Yeah. What exactly are you looking for? Well, in the event that our business has a disaster, we want to be able to recover from it. Okay, so this is encompassing the entire business. And they're like, yes. And we're like, okay, so really what you're asking for is a business continuity plan or a BCP. Bill or Sally inevitably says, well, I did some Googling and according to what Google tells me, that's a disaster recovery plan. And we're like, well, yeah, the disaster recovery plan really only deals with IT. Business continuity is in essence the rest of the business. Oh, well, why would Google tell me that? Because our certifying bodies haven't done a good enough job clearly defining what the terminology means. And yet you want to throw more terminology on top of this to further confuse the issue. It's like, guys, just in essence, pick with one and keep it simple. And it's almost like they would rather confuse you to the nth degree and not make it simple.
So what I do agree with, and I understand the conversation with a prospect for sure, but what I do agree with is keeping it simple.
Oh,
So
100%.
in terms of, yeah, we're on the same page with that, obviously.
Yeah.
So from the
And
perspective
just
of,
one sort of like addendum on that one before we should probably cut off because we've gone like way over our time. But the thing that I guess on that one is that when we deal with customers and we're assigning things in Shields and our software tool or whatever, it defaults in the template to ERMT, so emergency response management team, because that's what it used to be called forever ago. We keep it consistent. And so the thing is, that's in the template, and if it's or template, depending on how you want to call it, is that if it's a new process in the business, we say to them, do you want to use ERMT or emergency response management team, or would you like to change it to something else that you guys actually use, like a terminology that you use? And we see it probably about 30% of the time they want to change it, maybe 50% of the time they want to change it because they already have something inside. They'll call it like internal communications or whatever, or incident response team or whatever. So we're fine. So we, make all the changes in the template and everything like that or whatever, and it morphs to a terminology that the individuals in the business without any explanation will totally understand who we're talking about and what the responsibilities are. And so we want to be able to reflect or to use as much of the business terminology as we possibly can. If they're a new company and or this whole thing is a new process to them, we say, this is the reason why we call it this. If you want to keep this, that's great. If you don't want to keep this, give us another term that you want to use and we'll go from there. Because we want it to be representative of what it is. And I guess that at the essence or at the core of all of this is my sort of beef with business resiliency. I have no problem with business resiliency, but just stick with it for the next 40 years. Because we've just spent the past 20 years teaching people that business continuity
play. Yeah, agree.
Now we're changing it to business resiliency.
Well, so, all right. So I'm going to argue that point. Let's say we're not changing it.
Okay.
Let's say that we are adding a term that is sort of all encompassing. So we're never going to get rid of the term incident response, for example, because that role, that function still needs to exist. So one of the options would be, instead of sort of saying that business continuity planning is evolving into business resilience, we could simply say that business resilience is kind of the overarching term between all these separate functions that together provide a more robust response to a variety of incidents. But I don't think that's really where the term is going. I don't think that's where I don't think that that's where the industry is going with the term. I think they're looking at it truly from an evolution of business continuity planning to business resilience, which I don't necessarily have a problem with. But to kind of go back to your view of things, if you use it as a new term to be kind of all encompassing, then that's pretty straightforward, because you could literally draw a diagram and say, brackets, business resilience, and then put all the little subsets of that underneath it, all the kind of different major components, as well as sort of the different phases of operation.
Well, and that's the thing, is that if business resiliency is to encompass all of this, or the whole field of all of this and everything like that, as we've been saying, DR, or disaster recovery, really is just IT. Business continuity, or business planning, management, program, or whatever, is all the rest of the business. Well, that means you've taken your business and you've broken it in essence into two groups. At that point, yeah, there should be an overarching one on it, because there is something that should encompass the whole shooting match. But I'm not 100% sure that's what they're doing. I get the feeling this is just personal. I haven't seen anything written about it or anything like that. I get the feeling that they're trying to use business resiliency just to push out business continuity, because the business continuity term, I don't think was ever really properly marketed / sold / accepted / whatever. Ironically, it's older than almost everybody in this field, but that's here or there. But the thing is that it's almost like they're kind of like, yeah, we're kind of bored with that term. Let's go to something new. And you're like, no, stick with what you know. Call it a tissue, not a Kleenex, because it's a tissue and a Kleenex is just the brand. And it's one of those things where it's just like, no, make it clear and stick with it. Now, if you want to go to resiliency or whatever and stuff, that's fine, but that should encompass all of DR, all of BC, business continuity, and all of incident response. And so when you go to a business resiliency
and emergency management,
and if you go to a business resiliency trade show, which is, I guess, a good segue into the next podcast if we want to do about that, is that you should get companies from all of these different verticals in this field.
Definitely agree. I
guarantee you will not ever see that never, ever happen. Never, ever happen.
And that's such a shame, because that would be of tremendous value in a trade show, is to have those verticals present. But yeah, I know there's an entire incident management set of trade shows. I understand, but I would love to see a trade show that encompassed all those verticals.
And from a trade show perspective, and I know this is getting a bit ahead of ourselves and everything like that, and I said probably 5 minutes ago that we should probably shut this down because we're getting a little bit long. But if you go to like a DRJ or a CI or a BCI show or whatever stuff this, you almost have they've got 5 or 6 aisles, but you should almost have one aisle is all DR, one aisle is all BC, one aisle is all IM.
That would be amazing.
Because then the people that are in those aisles know what they're there for, as opposed to having one booth that's DR, one booth that's BC, one booth that's IM, and they're like, so what do you do? And it's no, I know what you're doing.
That's a great idea. I would love to see that. I don't know if we're likely to see it ever, but that would be very good.
Ever is a long time.
Yes, ever is a long time. All right, so let's wrap this up, since we have kind of gone over. Maybe this one gets split into 2. I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be fun, part 1 and part 2. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We hope you found this elucidating, informative, and hopefully maybe even a little bit entertaining. We'll sign off now, and catch us on all the places that you normally find your podcast. Thank you.
I think we're on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, I think it is. We're on YouTube, and I think we even got it up on Facebook. So we're all over the place. So you can't miss us.
You can't miss us. All right, awesome. Thank you. Until next time, have a great one.
Bye, everybody.